everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So, first off, just want to make sure everybody can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up or a green check mark. Okay, perfect. So, what we're going to do today is I'm going to use my webcam. I'm pretty sure I got it working now. So, again, if you can do the opposite, either give me a thumbs up if you gave me a green check mark, or vice versa if you can see me moving. I'm going to make it bigger too. Yes, we're all good? Excellent. All right. So this is sort of how I'm going to be sort of conducting classes moving forward. Um, so this is just my little webcam. Obviously, you can see my mouse pad. But I wanted to show you guys a couple different tools that we discussed last week very briefly here. So the first thing that I wanted to show you was the size of the artist tiles. So this is the artist tile set that I had purchased. I did not open this yet. But it's pretty much 75 of these Zentangle like squares. And this is about 3.5 by 3.5 inches. The other thing you could do is take watercolor paper and cut them up into squares if you want to make little Zentangle tiles, or you don't have to. I mean, it's really up to you. For example, one of these squares that I actually did here over the last week was this little still life. Here, I'll show you guys. There you go. So it's just my little fall still life that I did with markers and watercolor. But you could draw just on the squares itself, or if you do want to work with Zentangles, a nice thing, especially as we start to approach the holidays, you can make little bookmarks with Zentangle sketches if you want to. This is just one of my little bookmark things. I just basically made the shape myself and just kind of drew it out over the course of like a couple hours. But that's definitely something you could do. What I ended up doing is I just cut a piece of watercolor paper, folded the corners. You could probably glue it down and then hole punch it, and then ta-da, little bookmark. So whatever you'd like to do with the watercolor paper, you could also use various coloring things such as this, which is watercolor pencils or watercolor markers really. They are water-based markers that you can manipulate with water. And they're just like regular markers. It's just Tombow dual brush. They're really nice and fun to use. Another thing you could do would be a small watercolor set. This is just my little tile or travel set here that I have. So you could use something like that. As you can see, we talked about the brush, the watercolor brush before. This is just it in two pieces, but if you put it together, I take the cap off. This is full of water right now. But you basically could have your own watercolor brush with you. That's another thing you could do. Um, and then, of course, you could use crayons if you want, and then, of course, colored pencils. These particular ones are the ones that I use. So this is the Derwent Color Soft Color Pencils. So as you can see, I have used them a little bit. Um, but, they're not too bad. They're soft. There's at least 24 of them in this one. You could use these as well if you wanted to add color to your Zentangles. So before we get started, did anybody try drawing any Zentangles? Did they run into any issues, have any questions, anything that we need to recover from last class? You did all three that we did in last class. Okay, so you did practice it. Did you make a Zentangle with using all three in one tangle, or did you make like your own, or this is just sort of like checking in, seeing what kind of feedback, things like that? Okay. That's okay if you just did all three separate. Did anybody have any problems with trying the patterns, or just not quite sure, maybe forgot how to do it? Haven't really had time at all. That's okay. Sometimes our lives are so busy that we just don't have time. But it's good to take the time now, learn it, and then put it in practice later. So that's perfectly fine if you didn't have time. So just to kind of show you, um, actually I didn't, wrong sketchbook, but um, one of the detangles that I actually ended up doodling was this guy. This was just in my sketchbook. So that was just one thing. These don't have the same patterns that we used, but I did just doodle it. So this was just my little tangle. I ended up taking out the box a little bit because I wanted to see what it would look like. But this didn't take me very long, maybe about 20 minutes. So just to kind of show you what I've done. Okay, so moving on to our next topic. And you guys may see this, may not see this. It's perfectly fine. So today we're going to learn pattern as tonal value. So each tangle that we create has a tonal value. Tangle patterns can be mixed together on a tile to create a variety of different interesting values. So values for our purposes dealing with tangles only are more of the shades of black, white, and gray. The intensity or amount of dark or light value is referred to as tone. Tonal values are created or changed by alternating uh, or altering the amount of white space versus the dark space in a tangle. So, for instance, I just wanted to direct your attention to this one particularly. So, by placing the flux tangle, which is this little plant kind of pattern here, in the middle, it kind of lifts, or this is lifted from the darker regions and directly helps traveling the eye traveling across the page. So with this one, your eye kind of goes straight to here, and you can see that from the contrast between the brightness and the white to the dark, it tends to have this effect of having it pop out in front. Same with even the lines that are on here. You guys may not be able to see some of the lines here, but um, they're also popping out because of such a dark contrast to the background. So tone and values kind of work hand in hand. So how many of you have ever seen a value scale before? You could just react with whichever or type in the chat. So one of you have seen a value scale before? Okay, perfect. So a value scale is something that a lot of artists use across the board. They use it in drawing mostly, but they will use it in painting. They'll also use it with ceramics and sculpture. They'll also use it with fibers and fabric art, as well as digital art. Now, this particular value scale, I ended up making 11 slots in total if you want to count zero. So the way I have it is that 10 is as dark as it can go, and zero is as light as it can go. And then what I ended up doing is I took 1 through 9 and tried to make a value scale from adding a little bit of dark to each line all the way up until it basically blends right into 10. Now, how many of you have ever seen a gradient scale or ever played around with digital art with gradients? No? Chloe, you have? Okay. Anybody else have ever played around with gradients before or a gradient scale? So basically, a gradient scale, just to kind of show you guys here, is something like this. So I'm going to draw a square here or rectangle. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my graphite, but you can do it with a pen. This is my graphite pencil. And I'm actually going to sharpen it slightly. So give me 1 second while I find my sharpener. So this one here, if you're ever wondering what this is, like you've never seen a pencil like this before, it's basically a pencil holder and it holds lead. And so you just insert it and then you can have it be extended as far out as you want. So this is my pencil sharpener. I'm going to do a few quick turns. Okay. So basically, a gradient scale is just like a value scale, except instead of having one section at a time, it just flows one right into the other. So for instance, on this end, I'm going to make this the darkest possible. And you basically just lighten up as you color. So here, I actually ended up squishing that gradient scale, but I'm going to extend it here for my second round. And again, I'll make it much darker and lighten it up. Then do it again. And so you guys can kind of start to see that that gradient scale sort of follows the value scale above with the direction of how the shading is. And I'm going to rotate my pencil. And then maybe this is just too much on this end. So the nice thing about using your graphite when you're learning is taking your eraser and just erasing it. So what I'd like for you guys to do for this small exercise is draw out a long rectangle. It doesn't need to be perfect or anything. Just draw a little bit of a long rectangle on the piece of paper that you have or your sketchbook. And I want you to draw two of them. I want you to draw one for the value scale. You can do 0 to 10 or 1 to 10. And then I want you to create one that's a gradient here. So I'm going to give you guys about 2 minutes to set everything up. Do not do the value scales until after class. Okay. But I want you guys to set up. Once you have it set up, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you are all set and ready to move on. In the meantime, I'll just work on my gradient. We're just waiting on a couple more. Okay, so while we are waiting on one or two more people, I did want to show you about how I made this gradient scale with your pen. So one way for you to do the blending option would be by hatching. How many of you have ever heard of hatching before? And if you know what hatching is, can you describe it in the chat? Okay, so hatching is like this. And I'm going to zoom in a little here. So for hatching, it's just short lines. The closer they are, the darker it is. The further away, the lighter. How many of you have actually seen this technique before with drawing? Or never realized it was called hatching, but you do it? Yeah, perfect. Another type of hatching or blending option would be cross hatching. Elijah, go ahead. Sorry, saw your hand.
I just put up my hand because I did use it before, but I didn't know what it was called.
Gotcha. Okay. So another type is called cross hatching, and many of you may have heard of that. It's basically hatching, but going in the opposite direction. So for instance, I'm going to do cross hatching here. Cross hatching. Cross hatching is basically you have short lines in one direction, doesn't matter what direction. Then you put short lines in the other direction, and you can eventually work its way into a gradient kind of style. And then the closer you put the lines over top, the darker that area could get. And don't forget, if you're using one of those felt tip pens or something like that, like what I'm using, you can uh, eliminate some of the pressure of pushing down on the paper to help lighten the pen as well. That's the nice thing about the felt tip pens. That's what they're like. So that's cross hatching. You basically do a couple lines, do a couple lines. You're basically kind of like making a cross. So for ballpoint, the best thing about ballpoint is that you can, depending on how much pressure you put on the paper, you can also do the same thing by lightening it a little bit. You'll also have to not press as hard. I do not think I have a ballpoint pen. Let me just see here. Okay, so this is a ballpoint pen. So in order to do the hatching, it's pretty straightforward. Cross hatching, pretty straightforward. But in order to lighten, what I like to do is I like to hold the pen a little further, and I will just make a little bit of a line so the ink just barely touches it. So this actually is pen right here. It's just very light. I'm not pushing all the way down. I'm not putting pressure on it. I'm just holding it off to the side at maybe a 45 angle, maybe a 50 or 60-degree angle, and just putting pen down. It's hard with ballpoint pen, but you can do that. If you've ever seen those photorealistic drawings in ballpoint pen, that's sort of how they go about it. Now, there's another blending technique that you can use, which is called just blending, which is basically this graphite one right here. So here I put several layers on. The nice thing about graphite is that you can blend it with your finger. If you get a little bit of tissue paper, paper towel, anything like that, you can actually rub against it and blend it that way too. Blending stump will work, anything like that. Now just keep in mind you will get graphite on your hands if you do that. With pen, not so much because pen doesn't really go through or bleed through. Sometimes it can, and you can smudge it a little bit if you want to, but in reality, it's not the greatest thing to have. Now you could combine the two, as you saw here. I ended up taking some of the graphite on my finger and blended it in here a little bit. You can do that as well, especially if you want to have a nice consistent shadow or value scale or anything like that with your drawing. And then the last one, the last thing you could use in drawing for blending would be stippling. And what stippling is, so let me just write this stippling. So what stippling is, it's literally just small little dashed lines. It's not even the long lines like hatching. It's just little dots, little dashes. If you've ever seen those people with dots, you could do dots too. But that's basically what stippling is. The closer the dots are, the darker it is. The further away the dots are, the lighter it is. So you could just to kind of zoom in here. Hopefully you guys can see it sort of. But it's like little scratches, little dots, little dashes. And that's stippling. That's Stippling. And you could use any of these blending techniques for this value scale and the gradient scale that I want you guys to create. Any questions? So this is on the right. It's on the right side. So I'm drawing vertically here on this, so I do apologize, but it is on the right side. Now you can do it the other way around if you want to. You could have 0 be on this side and 10 be on this and have this be dark. I mean, it's up to you how you want to orient it. I know it's mirrored. Okay, perfect. So moving on how light and dark patterns kind of work together. So again, placing a light and airy tangle in between two denser, closely drawn, darker patterns is definitely a great way to see how the airy atmosphere of the lighter tangle lifts and the atmosphere altogether created by the darker patterns. So during your next week here, I want you guys to sort of practice light versus dark patterns and put them in different patterns altogether. So, what patterns are we going to learn? Well, there's going to be a few of them here. So, the first one we're going to learn today is going to be Knight's Bridge. And it's spelled just like you would like knight in shining armor. So, Knight's Bridge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use my Sharpie to start with to show you the next few lines here. So what I want you guys to do is on your tangle, somewhere, anywhere on the tangle, I want you to draw about 3, maybe 4 to 5 horizontal lines and have them slightly curve. And then I want you to do the same thing horizontally. So I'm going to draw maybe 3 horizontal ones. I think that's all I have room for. Yeah. And then the next step is pretty easy. Knight's Bridge is basically the checkerboard pattern. So here you'll just want to start and color in one square black, the other one white. So I'm just going to hurry and color these just so we don't spend a lot of time with them. And it should alternate. So you should have like white, black, white, or whichever. However way you start. Whatever square that you colored as black, the opposite should be white. And then black and then white. Now you could do this pattern as an alternative pattern, such as, if you want to watch me here, I'll do more of a curved kind of line. Again, an alternative could be curving it, could be making it literally the checkerboard or chessboard itself with straight edges and straight lines, or it could curve. You could pretty much fit this pattern into any kind of overall shape that your string might create when you create your next Zentangle. And then what you can do is with your pencil or your pen, um, add some shading to it, however way you want to shade it. So for instance, with this one, I'll probably just shade this side and this side so it's like as if another pattern is sitting on top of it and we only see the bottom part. You could shade it so it's as if it's layered if you wanted to. Um, However way you want to shade it. But it just adds a little life to it if you add the shading. Anybody have any questions on the Knight's Bridge? It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so the next one is going to be Nekton. Nekton. This one's going to require you to draw 4 lines in total as we go through the pattern. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to pick 4 to 5 places on the square. And what I want you to do is I want you to draw just 4 lines. So I'm just going to pick. And then somewhere in another direction, you're going to draw 4 lines again, but have them go diagonally. So for instance, I'm going to do, but that was more than 4 lines, but and then you're going to do the same thing again, but make them vertical. And then fill in the pattern as is. So if you feel that this needs to be vertical or whichever, that's fine. If you feel, however way you want to fill it. So it's just a bunch of lines put into a pattern of some kind. So again, you'll want to do vertical lines. You'll want to do horizontal lines. And you can do diagonal as well as diagonal. And then just layer them however way you want. You can even do them in a pattern if you want. Whatever you'd like. What I want to see is just your Tangled drawings. Any kind of drawings that you've kind of doodled that you do want to share. I don't need to see the practice of these unless you want to show it to me because you're having trouble trying to get it or something like that. Hope that answers your question. Perfect. Any questions on the Nectin design? Okay. Next one is the fescue, Fescu. This one's a nice fun one because it's very organic and very fluid. It's not hard. Basically what you're going to start with is you're going to be drawing a vertical line with a little bulb at the top and you want to color it in. And then somewhere else on the page, draw a curved one with a little bulb on the top. And then just keep filling it in. You could draw a small one. You could have one going through and dipping, one that stretches here, and that's fescue. This one might be a fun one to kind of play around with, for sure. So there's a couple more designs that I wanted to show you today, but I just want to make sure, do we need to review Knightsbridge, Necton, or Fescue? If we're good to move on, go ahead and give me a smiley face. Okay, just waiting on a couple more. Again, once you're ready to move on, just give me that smiley face. No, no, it's okay. All right. So moving on to our next one, which is going to be footprints. Now with footprints, what I want you guys to do is I want you to make this checker pattern, but make it smaller. So here's how I'm going to do it. I'm just going to take my time and just draw smaller squares. Doesn't need to be straight or anything like that. So with this pattern, it does require you to be a little more conscious on where your squares are at, as well as how small or how large they are. Now for this next one, I'm actually going to use a smaller version of my pen here just to show you guys where you need to place the next step. So what we're going to do after we have this step completed is we're going to draw two ovals in each square. So it'll look like this. And we're going to do it every other square is going to be up and down or diagonally or however way. So as you can see, I'm skipping every other one, just like as if we were coloring it in black and white, except we're doing it with two ovals. Or however many ovals we can fit in our pattern. Once you have this, the next step is to do the same thing, but have them go the opposite direction. So for instance, with this one, they're going to be horizontal for me. So just to show you again, I'm going in the opposite direction. And then there's a couple different variations that you could do with something like this, coloring it in. One variation, and I'm going to use a different color here. I'll use purple. So one variation is to color one square with the ovals colored in, and then the opposite square with the square actually colored in. So see how my pattern would be, one square would be white with the ovals colored, the other one would have a white oval with a dark square. So that's one step. Another step you could do, let me see if red shows up pretty easily here. Yeah, you guys can kind of see the red. But the second pattern that you could do would be just the ovals colored in, and then the entire square colored in. So that ends up taking away the two ovals that you drew. But that's definitely another variant that you could have. So again, ovals covered in, and then the square colored in. So that's another variation that you could do with this type of pattern. Another variation, and this is going to be the last one for this one. This is going to be 3, and we're going to have it in blue. And this one could be the opposite of this. So you could have your ovals in every single one, or at least the sideways ones colored in, and then the next one stays white. Again, colored in, white, colored in. Or you can have the opposite, which would be this one here. You could also have it white where it does not have any pattern at all. So you know how we had the pattern, and then let's pretend this was black, like this one. So black and then the pattern, and black and then the pattern. You could also do the pattern and white, the pattern and white, or so on. What do you mean you can't do? What are you confused on, Emily? This can get confusing, so I want to make sure. Which one are you confused on? Just the pattern itself? Or one of the patterns that I was okay. So, again, you know how to start it, right? It's just like a regular checkerboard pattern. Okay. So let me do a close up here, okay? So let's just say I did a checkerboard pattern, and here we are. So my first step is to decide if I want to do ovals or if I want to do ovals and skip a square or whichever. So let's just do ovals next to each other all across the pattern. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw one and draw two. And then on the next square, it's going to be the opposite direction. So if you did vertical up and down, you're going to do horizontal or horizontally curved, however way you want it. So here and here. And then same thing on this side. And then this would also around it be the same thing. So it would still be an oval shape. And same here. And then from here, you can decide how you're going to fill it in. So like I said, one of the patterns would be coloring in the ovals. I'm going to color in my horizontal ovals for this one. So just so you can see it. And then for the squares that have the symbol that looks like this, it's going to be colored around them. And then this one would be colored. This one would be colored. And we can't see the other one. Does that make sense on how to do that pattern? Just this one particularly? Okay. Do you want me to show you the other ones I was talking about? Just want to make sure everyone's got it. Okay. Oh, good. Ariana's with you as well. Okay, perfect. Are you both doing okay then? Because I know you both are sharing on one screen. Okay, perfect. All right, so footprints, yes, you can do a quite a different variety of it. And just to show you an example, I actually have a book that has a ton of different tangles on here. So I'm going to show you guys the footprint one. So here you can see the different variations of what I was talking about. And then in this tangle that's actually in a circle, they actually used that footprint right here. So just to kind of show you what it would look like within a tangle of some kind or why you would use that print. So the next one I want you guys to learn today is going to be flukes. And this is going to be the last pattern that we're going to learn. And then I'm going to talk about strings very briefly before we let you guys go. So with flukes, they're kind of like that zigzag pattern that we were kind of experimenting with last week. So to start with, we're going to do another sort of checkerboard, but this time make sure your lines are straight but diagonal. So for instance, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm going to turn my paper so I can do this and have it a little more straight. You guys can definitely turn your papers for this. But try to have your lines stay straight. Once you have a pattern down, the next step is pretty easy. So you're going to start from one corner of a diamond to the other corner. And you're basically just going to follow one line, two lines, three lines, and then color in that bottom part with the third line. And then you're going to do the same thing on each side. So again, one line, two lines, and three lines with colored in. One line, two lines, and three lines colored in. One, two, three. One, two, and three. I am doing this side sort of sideways, so it may not be perfect, but that's okay. So it sort of reminds me of like scales on like a lizard or like on a dragon if you're into like fantasy or anything like that. And then the last thing you can do, even with shading wise, is kind of make it feel like it's layered too. So by having these rows, you could have a little shading involved in here just to make it feel like it's popping out a little. And you could do the same thing. And again, you can blend it however way you want. But that way it sort of makes it feel like it's 3D and it's popping out a little bit. And that is the fluke pattern. Any questions on any of the patterns that we talked about? Elijah, Chloe, Emily, you guys are okay too? Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure before we moved on here. So the last thing that I wanted to mention to you guys was the string and how important the string actually is in our design. So the string is considered the foundation of our tangle. Oh, sorry, Chloe. I just saw that you were typing. I didn't realize. Do you have a question? Are you okay? Okay. So the string is the foundation of our tangle, but it is also just a suggestion. You can use it when you want to, if you want to. So here I came up with a couple different string like designs that you might experience yourself or you never really thought of before. So let me just go ahead and zoom in a little on this one. So I had one tangle here that has several different sections. You could do a couple ovals, you could do squares or such as letters here. I was thinking of letters when I made this. Stars or bursts or something, just a line, swirls. I mean, all the string can have an endless amount of possibilities depending on the type of design that you want to make. So, for instance, to bring you down to this one, this was a different tangle that I used to kind of combine a couple of what we learned last week to this week's patterns. So I ended up creating sort of like a weird kind of outline shape. And then I ended up cutting it in half. And then I cut this part in half. And then I ended up cutting this in half. That was my string, was this line, and this line. And then what I ended up doing was I just started filling in the patterns. And that became this tangle. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to practice the 5 tangles that we learned. Come up with an interesting string design of some kind, like any of these up here or your own. Okay. Once you have come up with that, I want you guys to at least create at least one tangle that combines some of the patterns from last class to some of the patterns that we learned this class. You can also make your tangle into more of a circle if you want to try that route. It is a little more difficult to do, but feel free to try it if that's what you guys want to do. Does anybody have any questions before I let you guys go? Anybody want to see a pattern made again? Anything like that? Riley's good. Okay, so if you guys are all set and ready to go, don't forget to send me a couple copies or a couple images of your tangles here moving forward. But if you guys do not have any other questions or anything, then you are free to go. I look forward to seeing you guys next Thursday. We'll be learning several more patterns. Thanks, guys. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.